Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We're rolling along. We're going to be headed down to the south, to Mid-South, gravel here in the next couple of weeks. And so we're excited for that. And as we prepare for that, I've been doing my heat training and this type of thing, getting ready for our time down and some of these early races.
Yeah, so you've been doing heat training for quite a while, whether we're talking about actual heat training where you're doing it on the bike, indoors. You and our guest today, Dr. Stephen Cheung, have talked ad nauseum about your bathtub protocol. Which,
that's right. Well, he begrudgingly probably talks about it, but yes, my do-it-yourself master's approach.
I'm sure he talks about it in his social circles. I know this guy.
Well, this is Dr. Stephen Cheung's fourth time back. He says it's among his top palmares. So, but he also, we talk a little bit about some of the recent studies he's been on. So we have an action-packed episode. We have both Stephen Cheung returning for his fourth, and then we have newly minted Dr. Norman Richard, who worked with Dr. Stephen Cheung, but also has gone off now and done several studies specifically on women and heat training, and also some postpartum sprint training. So we talk towards a lot of these different studies and concepts in this episode.
Yeah, I think for me it was super interesting to have them on because, heat training is something I've been vaguely interested in. I admit I'm a little bit not skeptical of it. Like, I firmly believe in it, but more just like, I just don't know that I can add one more thing to my plate, especially the kind of training that you've been doing where you're on the bike and doing the riding and like a lot of layers and stuff like that just does not seem enjoyable. And I think for me, the reason I'm able to be so consistent in my training is because I actually just enjoy the training.
That's right.
So when you start edging into these ways of training that just are purposefully making it suck more, I find that a little bit tough. And I mean, really, we know there's just such little amounts of research done on women athletes. So I think I was able to argue for a long time that, the science just isn't quite clear that I should be doing this. Fortunately or unfortunately, now we can argue that women do, in fact, get the adaptations from heat training. And excitingly, I think for you especially, the methodology that they were using in their research is actually stuff that anyone can do at home. Although, let's just caveat this pretty hard when we say, do not immediately try this at home just because you hear us talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And we do caveat that a lot, that this is sort of like a cherry on top or like extra 1%. And Stevens always reminds us and brings it back that this is for when you're preparing for an event that's going to be in very hot conditions, that this would be most relevant, but it doesn't replace good normal training, which I think is where you probably get a little like, well, if I go out and do the training and enjoy that, then that's going to be 95+% of the benefit. So this is very much like a nice addition if you're getting ready for hot conditions. But the nice thing is that they showed in Norman's one study that you can train at home, just overdressing with some winter clothes without a fan on your trainer, and over a series of 10 days plus a bit of a maintenance after that, that you do get an effect as far as heat adaptation.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to say my personal preference is really do my workout and then hop in our sauna. I've been very excited about the sauna. I think when you live in very cold climates, having a sauna is a fantastic addition to
that's right,
to your thing. But I like that passive, like, relax, recover, and heat up.
Well, and I think we don't necessarily talk about that in this episode. Dr. Stephen Cheung has been on talking a bit towards some of these passive versus active heat strategies. And one of the things that I think is true, this might be more my theory than his theory, but for people who are more time limited, more masters training, I think the active training makes sense because they're able to do their sport while they're doing it, whether it's a little slow and miserable or not. You are getting your pedal strokes, or for runners, getting your impacts in, which could be good or bad for runners. But then for someone like yourself that's already at fairly high volume relative to what you can absorb, then you might be better suited to do the passive heat training because you couldn't, like, adding more steps to your week doesn't necessarily make sense.
For sure, yeah. And I think there is a bit of a mindset sort of thing in there too, just like which one feels the best for you.
And do you have them? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so we differentiate. Stephen was actually on the CBC podcast, which we'll also link to, the dose, talking about sort of heat therapy. And so it's sort of like a little different. It's like the heat therapy would be more like hopping in your hot tub at the end of a hard day for 10 or 20 minutes. It's enjoyable versus the difference here would be like maybe Molly hops into the sauna for 20 or 30 minutes after an already vigorous run or long run where you're already heated up. So you then are less comfortable. Like we've tried to do the sauna together and I'm just there like with head and hands trying to suffer my way through this.
Yeah, it turns out this is not like a sexy. No. I think people get saunas and hot tubs and are like, this is going to be like a sexy good time. And I assure you, it is not.
Yeah. So in any case, we wanted, the big highlight with this episode with Normand, which we'll get to momentarily, is that this was a study done all in women, which is exciting for any studies just to be done in all in women. We were excited about that. And then certainly heat training, both do-it-yourself sort of heat adaptation block that as they go is not super, I don't want to say demanding, but like as far as time demanding or disruptive to the training, it's not too bad, but it is 5 hours out of your week for 2 weeks and then some maintenance after that. So it is enough time for someone who maybe only has 6 or 7 hours. So it is a consideration how that might fit or if it does fit.
But for someone who's, say, up here in Canada or is in northern chunks of the U.S. and is planning to do a race down in Texas or in California or going to South America to race or any of that kind of stuff, there's lots of Ironmans that are happening in warmer climates this time of year, all that, like there's plenty of mountain bike races, that kind of thing. I think this could be, very beneficial. And the nice thing, like you say, is it's free. As long as you already have a trainer, this is something that you can just be doing as a protocol that other than maybe a higher than usual water and electricity bill for the amount of laundry you're going to have to do. Yeah. It's just very simple to do.
Excellent. And then we talked just on the end, just because I do, again, studies in women is exciting. Normand's other study that just actually got approved is in post-pregnancy, which is postpartum, would be the other way to say that. They did some sprint interval training, so something like a 5 or 6 by 30 seconds, really, really hard intervals, 5-10 weeks out from pregnancy or birth. And they saw a great effect in those women. So for anyone who has given birth recently, this could be really exciting or works with that population.
Also, congratulations.
Yeah. But I think really cool for the people we speak to where it's like, this could be an opportunity to do some interval training, again, safe and doctor supervised. Once you don't just immediately do it, obviously, but is a really exciting, again, study done all in women, obviously a very relevant question for women post-pregnancy and how they get back to fitness and maybe even like get some fancy training in their post-pregnancy as well.
Love it. All right, well, let's get into this episode. Enjoy our chat with Doctors Stephen Cheung and Normand Richard. All right, let's do it.
Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. We're welcoming Dr. Stephen Cheung back for, I think, a 4th time. I did a quick count there, and so always impressive. Not nearly his most impressive accolade, but we're welcome back, Stephen. Thanks for being here.
Depends on who you're asking.
It's pretty up there.
And I know you just finished one of the things you've been up to in your sabbatical year. You were part of an IOC big study with a lot of big names on it. So congratulations on that. So we're going to pull that in today. But you also said, as always, I always like when you're on a guest because you always give me a huge reading list. And these are a couple of people you need to look into. And you said Normand Richard is a newly minted doctor, Dr. Normand Richard. So we're going to welcome him to the show as well because you said we have to talk to him because he is doing great work with women and heat adaptation and just generally in performance. So Normand, welcome to the podcast and thank you for taking Stephen's advice to be on our show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe you could tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you working now that you are a full doctor? You have the doctorate out of the way. So what are you up to? And maybe just a little intro to this study we're going to talk about today with women and heat training.
Absolutely. So I just wrapped up a PhD at Trinity Western University and Simon Fraser University with Dr. Anita Cote. Stephen was one of my committee members. So we were looking at kind of cardiovascular changes with exercise in females. And a big study we did was looking at heat training in women. So in essence, it was a 5-week heat training study in female cyclists only. And that was broken down into a 2-week heat acclimation block, followed by a 3-week heat maintenance block. And then we looked at a bunch of very cool things. We did performance metrics. We looked at heart function with cardiac output. And then we also looked at hemoglobin mass and blood volume to kind of see the hematological changes as well.
And I think one
Very
of the
cool.
really unique parts of this study too is that while it had a very scientific component, the heat adaptation was really meant to be very practical, very doable, quite low tech, really heavy clothing base that Normand's going to talk about without a lot of fancy kind of monitoring equipment. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the big things with this study that it is very practical and doable for people also.
Very cool. And I do want to just ask, I mean, we hear this all the time right now, is that we're finally starting to dig into, women athlete physiology and actually do studies on that. So how did you end up doing this study? I want to back this out to how this ended up crossing your path and how you got interested in it.
Yeah, I would say it's personal reasons and like professional reasons. Personally, I've been working as an exercise like a CEP, a CSEP CEP for the past since 2013, and these are kind of questions that were coming up to me. And then also I'm a cyclist myself, and I've done races in warm environments, so in Oregon and whatnot. And, like female cyclists would ask me, like, what can we do? And I'd say, well, you could do some heat training, but there's not much female specific stuff. And then from a researcher point of view, there's been some very much needed pushes to kind of catch up the research on the female side of things. And I told myself, like, the last thing the world needs right now is another study looking at tall white dudes. So I said, I'm going to be the change I want to see.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
Now that's true, and we've known that for a while, so it's great that we're taking action. Now, what would be the barriers then? Like, is there a reason, or like what were the hurdles that you did find as you took this on versus doing, the study that has been done multiple times with only men? Like, what were the differences to actually make this happen?
Yeah, there was actually quite a bit of interest in this study, to be honest. I've had people, we're located in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I had people drive from Seattle to our lab to do the study. So we had some pretty good interest, which was very neat. Um, in terms of hurdle, I would say there's always like this hurdles of like any invasive physiological study that has like a big training component. So there's lots of dedication, and some of the lab tests are not, I'd say they're not unpleasant, but they're not like a walk in the park. Um, and
Well,
then,
let's not forget one of the challenges, Normand, was we had to build a DIY heat chamber for you.
yeah, so I had to build a heat chamber. Um,
Since you don't have a fancy chamber like I
Mhm.
do.
exactly.
Okay. And then with like I know reading through the study there was like a bit of like cycle tracking, and I know that's one of the things they say, oh, women have hormones so we can't study them. That was like the sort of like that's how I'm putting it. I'm sure it was more scientific than that, but as far as that, what was in the study, like what did you have to do
Yeah,
to make it happen?
that's a super good question. And like one of the reasons why females have been excluded from heat research in the past, because if you look at a natural menstrual cycle, during the follicular phase, body temperature is a bit lower than in the luteal phase where it's zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.7 degrees higher. Um, does that matter for heat acclimation or not? Maybe yes, maybe no. In our study, we didn't control for it. One of the main reason was that, if you're going to heat acclimate the real person out there in the real world, are they going to wait, okay, I need to start this week and then I need to finish this week, but then
Right.
my competition is on this day, so I need to like backward count all of this. So is this practical for real life? And then we also just wrapped up another study where we looked at the effects of menstrual cycle on the increase in body temperature and also how good wearable sensors were at predicting temperature in females. And in that study, we looked at menstrual cycle across two follicular phases and across two luteal phases. And we saw that the rise in body temperature was pretty much the same in both phases. So we thought maybe we're making a bigger deal out of this than it really is. So, and you
Hmm.
know, if you're the stimulus from the exercise and the heat is big enough to mask any differences we might see in a
Right.
resting basal state.
Right.
And to add to that too, I'm part of a meta-analysis right now, looking at specifically that question of does it matter what phase of the menstrual cycle that females heat adapt in? And overall, in literature, we ended up with 7 studies. Not to give the plot away since we're still in submission with the paper, but there doesn't really seem to be major kind of differences depending on both oral contraceptive use and also menstrual cycle phase. So to support what Normand was saying, I think again limited literature, overall 7 studies, but the evidence there suggests that there is no huge impact from menstrual cycle phase. That the stimulus, as Normand said, that you're going to get from heat adaptation is similar. So
Okay.
that's also really good news. And I think both for scientists, if that's true, that it removes one potential barrier or excuse for
Okay.
research in females with heat adaptation. And it's also good news for females in general that maybe this isn't something another thing you have to worry about in terms of am I doing heat adaptation the right way?
Hmm.
So again, we can circle back to that when the paper gets accepted, but that's the current idea that we're going with right now.
All right. Well, let's hear about this study then. Like, what did you do to try and investigate whether heat training worked for women or how it was working for women? Tell us a bit about the methods in this study.
Yeah, absolutely. So our participants were all endurance athletes. They were all cyclists. So fitness, we had some pretty fit gals, some VO2 max in the high 50s and, peak watts of, 370 in a ramp test. So we had some pretty fit participants. We had a experimental group which did the heat training, and then we had a control group which did a heart rate matched cool weather training. So in other words, they did the same amount of training, but it wasn't in the heat. And we did heart rate matched because we wanted the internal load to be the same, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So there were 3 lab visits, one before the start of the intervention, one after the 2-week heat acclimation block, and then one at the end of the intervention. So during these lab visits, we measured VO2 max on a bike. So that was like a ramp test. And then from that, we got the VO2 max with a metabolic cart and then the peak watts from the ramp test. And that was done in 18 degrees Celsius. So kind of like a thermoneutral, cool environment. We also measured blood volume and hemoglobin mass. So kind of like how many red blood cells you have with a technique called carbon monoxide rebreathing. Um, and then the participants then did a 20K time trial in a kind of our homemade heat chamber. So the heat chamber was
Okay,
30. Yeah.
you've mentioned this homemade heat chamber. We need to hear about how this is set up.
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, we went to Rona and bought a big greenhouse. And then it kind of looked like we were growing cucumbers in our lab, but really we were doing thermoregulation research.
Okay.
So we had 3 space heaters, um, a kettle to make humidity, and a dehumidifier to decrease the humidity if we needed to.
Okay. And you did this, so I want to differentiate this because this is where sometimes on the social media you'll see people doing this for the training, but you were doing
Yeah,
this more to say like now this is the test, this is the event we're
exactly.
going to is an actual humid environment. How does your body react to this? So you're not saying that these people need to train in this. This is how
Yeah.
you assessed.
I
How,
should stop typing Rona into my phone and like searching for a greenhouse to purchase for our backyard for this.
Yeah, you could do it that way, but that's not what the participants did for the home training. Well,
okay.
I'll get to that in a sec.
Yeah. Yeah. Carry on. Carry on. We
Yeah, for sure.
interrupted.
So yeah, we had our Velotron, so kind of like our ergometer was inside the heat chamber, and all of our physiological equipment as well. And then the chamber was 35 degrees Celsius with 45% humidity. And then the participants did a controlled ramp warm up, so from 75 to 100 watts over 5 minutes to kind of like spin their legs after the VO2 max test. And then they did a 20-kilometer time trial. So all they saw was cadence and gearing and distance remaining, and then we just told them complete the distance as fast as you can. So they were able to change gears and whatnot. So during the time trial, we measured their body temperature, their skin temperature, kind of how they were feeling perceptually, and we also measured their cardiac output. So that's their heart's pumping capacity. So then after that, that was it for the lab testing. And then the participants did the home training. So that's kind of what people are probably interested in. So in essence, it was stationary cycling with overdressing. So picture yourself, on your smart trainer at home, um, but instead you're wearing all of your winter cycling kit. So these participants, I'll kind of briefly describe what they were wearing. So they're wearing wool socks, kind of like long johns or like long thermal underwear, two pairs of sweatpants, a long sleeve shirt, two sweatshirts, a jacket, and then a kind of like a waterproof garbage bag overhead over top to kind of minimize the evaporation, and then like a neck gaiter, like a buff, and then a hat, and then a pair of gloves. So they were like really overdressed.
Oh, the
Now,
laundry. Did they get a stipend for like the heat and water
yeah,
bill?
I tried to get sponsorship from like Tide or something, but
Fair enough.
laundry is a big caveat for that, unfortunately.
Okay, so they were doing this, I think it was 5 times per week for 2 weeks, and that was your main like heat training
Mhm.
period. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, you got that right. And then the sessions were 1 hour long.
Okay.
Now, what's worth noting is that with heat training, there is a risk of getting hurt. So it's not like the more the better. You're not trying to get as hot as possible. So you're just trying to get hot. Um,
Okay.
so we didn't use any fancy gadgets or really high-tech lab instruments while people were at home. In essence, we gave them heart rate anchors and then like watt anchors and perceived anchors. So we used data from the VO2 max test. So in essence, for the 1 hour, their heart rate was between 70 to 75% of heart rate max. So kind of like a zone two, zone one type training, nothing super hard. And then the watts for that 1 hour were about 35 to 45% of their view to max peak power output. So if you've ever done a ramp test and your peak power is 300 watts or whatever, you would do 35 to 45% of that. Or if you can't do a ramp test, you could always take like your best 4 minute or your best 5 minute and take that as a percentage. And then,
So the other thing we should highlight here is that we didn't have, besides heart rate and wattage, we did not have really any other physiological measures. One of the key things people may be saying, well, there are those non-invasive core temperature monitors now. Why didn't you use that? Well, other study that Normand was referencing about menstrual cycle and tracking over 2 phases, we specifically tested the accuracy and the reliability of those non-invasive core temperature sensors. And we looked at 2 different units, and we found that while they were reliable in terms of saying the same thing each time, their accuracy in terms of their actual values was not where we needed to be. So we actually did that study first, and it was from there that we decided, no, we can't be using those non-invasive sensors to guide our heat adaptations. And so that's how we came up with our kind of home-based, quite low-tech, just heart rate and wattage protocol.
And I believe you had a couple that are taken from other studies as well. There's sort of like goals of like feeling, I guess, but like you were supposed to be like uncomfortable for the last 15 minutes or something. I'll let you say, but there was like a couple words that like really sweaty or something like that.
yeah, absolutely. So we use some perceived metrics, so kind of like how you're feeling. And then that's all. They're kind of all on the paper, but essentially by the end of the sessions, from those scales, you need to feel extremely sweaty and very hot. And then the other thing too is we use the rate of perceived exertion, which is kind of like a scale of 0 to 10, how hard you feel you're working just as a whole in your entire body. So 0 being rest, and then 10 being like this is the hardest things you've ever done. And then for the entire session, we wanted people to be in like the 5 to 7 range. So not killing themselves, but it felt hard because of the heat.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was for the 2 weeks.
Yeah.
There was something else I was going to mention.
I was actually just wondering,
Yeah.
like, with the rest of their training, were they all doing the same training otherwise, or was this in addition to regular training? How did we
Yeah,
account for
no,
what
that's
else
a
they
very
were
good
up to?
question. Yeah, so the sometimes with some studies, just the training intervention itself can be a training stimulus, right? So like, are they getting fitter because they're doing your study, or are they getting fitter because of the of the like intervention you're doing? So in essence, I looked at all the participants, their Strava for like the past 3 months, and then I made sure that throughout the entire study, their training volume remained the same. So for example, if you're doing 10 hours a week for the past 3 months, I wanted to keep doing 10 hours a week for the study. And the way we achieved this is we said for these heat training study, just subtract it from like your zone one, zone two training, right? So keep the intervals or whatever you're doing, or if you're lifting weights, keep doing that. But let's say you're doing like a 2 hour ride on Wednesdays, remove 1 hour from that 2 hour ride and do 1 hour of heat training.
Okay. Okay.
Nice.
Interesting. All right. And then maybe do you want to take us? So that was for the main intervention, and you often see that that sort of like 5 to 10 days plus or minus for the initial thing. But then there was this idea of maintaining it, and maybe that would give more benefit. So that was the next 3 weeks of your study, I believe, right?
Yeah, got it. So yeah, after the 2 weeks, they came to the lab, which was kind of like referred to as the mid time point, and we did the exact same test battery I described earlier on, and then they moved on to the maintenance phase. Our theory was that the maintenance phase would just kind of maintain the adaptations they had developed earlier on. Um, and in essence, the maintenance phase was 3 sessions per week as opposed to 5 sessions. And that was for 3 weeks. And then after that, they came to the lab once more at the end. So the heat training during the maintenance phase was the exact same thing, still on the trainer for 1 hour, but just 3 times per week as opposed to twice per week. And then what we saw was that the heat maintenance made potentiated the heat acclimation. So it made people even better. So their time trial times got even faster.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Cool.
really cool.
So
Okay.
it is a kind of a practical thing that we designed into this 2 weeks heavy heat acclimation and a 3 week maintenance, knowing that most people aren't going to put up with 5 weeks of 5 times a week kind of effort for heat adaptation. That's why we want to look at, okay, let's typical dosing of 2 weeks of heat acclimation, as we see in a lot of the literature, and then what is the easiest way to kind of maintain that kind of heat acclimation status. And again, the good news that Norman saw in his study is that not only do you kind of maintain, you seem to actually keep improving even with reduced amount of heat stimulus over those weeks 3 to 5. So again, that's really, really great practical kind of takeaways too, that you don't need to just keep hammering yourself with heat over and over and over again for weeks and weeks and weeks,
Right.
that you can dose yourself early and then kind of maintain the heat stimulus with a few sessions a week and still get the benefits, if not kind of improvements too.
hmm And I know, Stephen, on the previous podcast, we've talked about heat. You've said like the best practice and what you've recommended in the past to different pros and Olympians and stuff as well is sort of doing this as far away from, or not as far, but far away from the main competition, so that then you can do this maintenance and make sure you're actually doing the training that's going to prepare you for the specific demands of the event, like your intervals and stuff. Because heat training takes a big load, it makes you tired and it is a stimulus, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one really important thing to keep in mind, that heat is an added stress on your body. So the really nice thing that Normand did with this study was kind of, controlled for that in terms of the training, as he said, was the heat training took over some of their normal training. So that was
Right.
one control. But the key thing to remember is heat remains added stress.
Yes.
So that's what we're seeing with the data, that they are getting that additional heat dose compared to the control group, and they are improving. But that also has an impact on your ability to recover and really just, keep healthy also. It's just really make sure to keep in mind that heat isn't benign. It is a stimulus for improvement, but it's also an added stress.
And I have seen people personally who have gotten like way too into it and like basically burn themselves out, whatever you want to, whether that's fatigue or injury or whatever, doing like only that or too much of it or pushing too deep in the sessions. In fact, I just saw like a very well-renowned sports scientist from South Africa talking about on his podcast how he basically like just didn't bother going to a big hot race he was going to do because he got way too into the heat training, got really tired and started like hating training and sort of had these symptoms of burnout. So I think certainly worth highlighting that there is, while there could be some reward here that you've shown in the study, there's also some risk. So we wanted to highlight that here as well.
You can definitely like overcook yourself, not as a pun, but you can overtrain
I was going
yourself.
to say the burnout, the cooking.
Literally and
You're just
figuratively.
Yeah, it's
get yourself
definitely
into
not.
hot water.
Uh, so I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask, like, again, the specific question is when you did this now in the conclusions and the results, what are the differences for women? Did we see a difference versus past studies for women and what they need to be concerned about or what benefits they might expect?
Well, the very good news is that everyone in our experimental group heat acclimated. So if we're going back to like the menstrual cycle, in my study, I had a very heterogeneous sample, so very mixed sample. I didn't have like 21-year-old white university students. I had, people of varying ages, various ethnicities, various menstrual cycle status, various fitness. And then I had people who were naturally cycling, some people were taking IUD, some people were on oral contraceptives. Some people didn't have a period, and some people were postmenopausal, and they all heat acclimated. So it kind of seems if you do the heat training, most likely you're going to adapt. So that's
Nice.
very good news. Yeah.
Hooray. I'm like kind of bummed by that because it means I actually have to heat train. I can't just use like, oh, we don't know the science for women, so I'm just not gonna go in the garage and wear 18 layers. Yeah.
Now, Stephen, I know you have this UCI study, which is a big deal, a lot of big names. Your name, I think, comes first on this study, though.
Yeah, no, it was a huge honor to be part of it. And Louise Burke, who is from Australia and just really a legend in
Yes.
sports science and especially nutrition, she led this big move, a big group effort to develop a series of position papers on everything to do with cycling and nutrition. So, uh, my part of it, the paper that I led was on nutrition in special environments. So, whether we're talking about heat, cold, and also altitude. But just to highlight, there's lots of great chapters. There's ones on esports and gravel, for example. There's one on BMX. There's one on I believe there is one specifically on female nutrition, but yeah, there's just about 12 total different chapters, and each led by really an all-star team in
Yeah.
that field. And then we are right now developing an overall consensus statement from all of those too. So
Excellent.
again, the chapter I led was on heat, cold, and altitude and how that may affect your nutrition. And you're right, I had an absolute stellar team of colleagues to work with on this.
Excellent. Now, thinking towards Normand's study and these people doing this heat training, is there something that we can take from your position paper then that would say, like, when we're taking on heat training and we're hoping to have these adaptations, things that we might want to keep in mind in terms of our nutrition, our hydration while we're taking these on, and probably our supplementation as well?
Sure, maybe the first thing to discuss is whether you should kind of keep drinking during heat adaptation workouts, because the idea is that if you don't drink and you're deliberately dehydrating over the course, maybe you're going to get more stimulus because you get both the dehydration stress and the heat stress. And obviously, we also know that if you are dehydrated, you also heat up faster. So that was an idea that was really studied in the early 2010s
Right.
about whether if you were also combining dehydration with heat adaptation? Do you accelerate heat adaptation? And there are some studies suggested that may be the case, but also probably more studies that suggest it's not going to benefit.
Hmm.
So would I recommend that you kind of reduce your drinking during these heat adaptation workouts? I wouldn't, for a couple of reasons. It doesn't seem to accelerate your overall rate of heat adaptation. And also, the other very pragmatic thing is you're going to put yourself in a hole if you're
Yes.
dehydrated day after day after day. And one of the things you got to remember is your priority for each workout is also to be ready for the next workout. So if you're dehydrated, you're going to take longer to get back up to normal hydration. It's going to slow down your recovery. So that would be the first thing that I would say is important. Just drink and drink more because you're going to be sweating a lot more. So you can go by thirst, but I think these specific heat adaptation workouts, I would probably have a really scheduled kind of backup plan in terms of have a timer every 15 minutes. Make sure you are drinking X amount in addition to drinking to thirst, just to be on the safe side of making sure you don't put yourself in too much of a hole. So that would be one thing. The other thing to realize with heat adaptation is that you are going to be sweating a lot more. So even though one of the signs of heat adaptation is that this saltiness of your sweat is reduced over the course of heat adaptation, you're still going to be losing a lot of electrolytes because you are sweating more, right? So you want to make sure you consider having an electrolyte drink too, not just water, and also just keep an eye on the overall kind of salt content of your diet too. You probably want to, again, err on the side of maintaining salt intake. Don't go for a low salt kind of diet at the same
Right.
time.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, do you want to be kind of drinking cold water during your heat adaptation? I think it's more a matter of comfort. I don't think it's really going to affect your rate of heat adaptation if you are drinking kind of room temperature water versus cold water, but it's more what is palatable. If it's going to
Probably
make you drink
though.
more, then go for kind of whatever water temperature you want.
Right. I guess it does make sense though. Don't like this isn't the time to practice your cooling strategies, which I know you also write about for race day. Don't take your ice
Yeah.
slurry while you're trying to also heat yourself up.
No, like not necessarily go for icy cold water,
Right.
but it's not wrong to have cool water while you are drinking. You're not going to dampen your rate of heat adaptation by doing that. So that would be it from the kind of hydration angle.
Hmm.
And the good thing with being on a stationary trainer is you really have no excuse for not having your nutrition nearby, right? You can have tables and stuff. You can have all of your a cooler kind of right next to you with cool drinks or whatever. So just make sure you plan ahead of time and make sure to avoid kind of getting dehydrated. I know I've done studies that suggest that mild dehydration doesn't affect your overall performance, but this isn't the time to or the place for it.
Right.
Again, focus should be on recovery for the next day too.
Okay. And then is there anything around iron? I guess either of you could take this on. Like, did the study use iron supplement at all? Given that there's some suspect, although the study didn't find it, that we're going to change blood profiles, things like red blood cells. Is there anything with iron that we should be considering when we take on something like heat training?
I
Normand, did you have a thought?
Sure, yeah. I guess it depends, I guess a bit what you're chasing. For like a shorter term, like 2 week heat training block, you're not going to increase the amount of red blood cells you have. Red blood cells take like about 4 weeks to increase usually. Um, but if you're doing a longer kind of like 5 week heat training block, kind of like the Norwegian research has shown, where they increase red blood cells, I would recommend supplementing with iron. We gave our participants iron, um, like the Norwegian studies did. Um, the main difference I'd like to highlight between our study and theirs is that our heat load was smaller. So they did 25 hours over 5 weeks, and then we did 19 hours over 5 weeks. So their studies were by purpose, the goal was to increase hemoglobin mass. That was their goal. Whereas our goal was to see what's the comparison between heat acclimation and heat acclimation maintenance. But I do want to highlight that in both ours and then the Scandinavian studies, we both saw improvements in performance. So you can see improvements in performance without seeing improvements
Yeah.
in the amount of
Yeah.
red blood cells you have. And like this, again, the Scandinavian studies, they're showing improvement, but it's like 2 or 3%. So it's not like using EPO. So
Yes.
it's kind of when you've maxed out everything else in your training, you're doing 18 hours a week, you've got perfect sleep, perfect nutrition, everything else is perfect, and then you're just chasing that 1 or 2%.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and I think that's an important caveat too, is you still need to do your normal training. You still need to follow a good solid training plan, and you need to optimize all of the other stuff of nutrition, recovery, good sleep habits, all of those. Heat training is never going to be a magic bullet for anything. It is that final layer of preparation once you've already done all of the other things that you should be doing in terms of being a good athlete.
Hmm.
Well, and it occurs to me that heat training could possibly mess up a lot of those basic things, right? Your recovery, suddenly you need to hydrate more, and your stomach's a little, you know how it feels when you come off of like a really hot ride. You're not hungry, so now you're maybe recovery is a little tougher. Sleep is a little tougher if you're a little overheated. I know I need to be in like 0 degrees to be comfortable sleeping. So I imagine if you don't already have world-class basics, heat training is going to really mess with everything.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's my constant theme that heat is an added stress. It's a stimulus for improvement, but it's also an added stress. So make sure that gets factored in. And so for example, again, Normand study, we did the heat training with pretty mild kind of endurance load, right? It was pretty low intensity exercise. It wasn't during your key intervals. And that's the case for a couple of reasons is A, in terms of the added stress we already talked about, and B, we know that if you are really hot, you're simply not able to exercise as intensely as you want to. And the whole purpose of those intervals, the really kind of quality, high quality, precise interval workouts is to have that muscular stress, have that metabolic stress, and you just can't reach those targets if you are also heat stressed. So,
Hmm.
yeah, if you are going to be doing heat training, I would definitely just keep it to the easier days and kind of the zone one, zone two, really easier rides.
Excellent. Now, what I'm wondering here too, like I think I agree with that in principle, the world-class basics and this sort of thing. What I was wondering about, because I've been pondering this, and I know Stephen, you were just on the Dose Again, which is another great podcast, a CBC podcast at that, talking a bit about heat therapy, I think they were calling it. And so just this would be like we got a sauna recently. We can go in there at the end of the day and relax for 20 minutes. Maybe this is good for our general health and our wellness. Which is sort of different than what we're talking about because this is unenjoyable, thinking more towards training, but related. But what you were talking about there, Stephen, and I'd be curious on both of your opinions on this is there like is there a requisite fitness or training status to put someone into some of these heat training interventions? And who I'm thinking about is I have maybe 40 or 50-year-old people, maybe they struggle a bit with consistency, maybe they aren't as motivated to do intervals. Is this something that I could use with these people, or do we have hesitation with that for some reason? I guess, Norman, does anything come to mind when I talk about these? We could call them more beginner cyclists, taking on some of this heat training.
Um, I think ultimately it depends what you're chasing. I don't think it's going to be like a magic bullet. If these people are willing to kind of adapt to heat to go do like a ride or a race in a warm environment, it'd probably be beneficial. But for general fitness improvements, I would defer back to like basic principles of exercise prescription, that's like specificity.
Yeah.
Just um, doing those rides and whatnot. Like, but there, as you mentioned, there are also general health benefits, but I don't think that's what's going to improve you on the bike is going in the sauna for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Stephen? Anything there?
I would agree with Norman that heat training is not for everyone. It's not the first thing you should be doing as a beginner cyclist. Consistency of training is much more important. Following some kind of a plan is much more important. And the heat adaptation is really to get you ready for if you know you're going to be competing in a hot environment.
Hmm.
And B, there is the possibility that heat training can improve your performance even in temperate environments. Again, the evidence in the literature is kind of 50-50, but it can be an added bonus. So I would really go back to heat training is for a very specific purpose. One, hot environments and knowing that you're going to compete in those hot environments. And B, maybe it's going to improve your performance in kind of less hot environments. But that's really just an added bonus.
Yeah, like assuming you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, and then you're
Yeah.
chasing extra bonuses.
Well, and I guess the way I think about it sometimes is like a math thing where like if I am Pagacha, I am like the world-class cyclist and I push 500 watts or whatever, 1% of 500 is a big number. But if I am someone who can't get like to 100 watts yet, it just like that could be like day-to-day fluctuation, right? Like that's like a good sleep and you get 1 watt. It's not like I know it's not quite that simple as math, but that's the way I sort of think about these cherry on top or these training accessories is it's not the big thing of getting on your bike, having fun. Sure, jump in the sauna or the hot tub at the end of a hard day, but we don't need to have you like overdressing in a garbage bag in your garage and feeling miserable while you're doing exercise. You could probably just enjoy this exercise as much as you enjoy indoor trainer.
Yeah, absolutely. Use it for what it is, and yeah, no more, no less, really.
Okay, that's good advice. I wanted to check on that because I like kept doubting myself. Is this something that like should? But I think that's good advice that there's like it's gonna be if it's done right, it's sort of a little miserable, and these maybe aren't the folks that we need to make miserable right off the bat, and who will it'll be worth making them miserable, I guess, as well. I had a couple more sort of quick hits here. Which one is going to be the best here? I think we touched on a few of these.
You
Yeah,
want to
actually,
talk about
we got.
sauna versus hot tub
Well,
and
I guess that's interesting too. You do talk a bit about that on that Dose podcast, Stephen. We certainly talked about that, but we in this was an active do-it-yourself sort of active training, which I do like with my master cyclists, the ones that I have used this for, even for myself. I do like the idea that we're actually like doing the sport when we do the heat adaptation. That seems more like a rich training environment. We only have so many hours to pedal our bike. Maybe we should pedal our bike versus sitting in a sauna passively. But I'm wondering, is there, if you could take these people and we're going to keep doing it, do you think there is the benefit in sort of like saying, yeah, I'll overdress for 20 minutes in on my bike, get heated up, and then jump in, since I have a sauna, jump in my sauna for 20 minutes. Do you think there would be any difference or any advantage to doing that sort of mixed strategy?
I think I'm also very pragmatic that to me, heat is heat,
Hmm.
and how you get your body warmed up doesn't really matter in terms of the performance benefits, and even in some senses, kind of the health benefits. Yeah, so if you want to do overdressing, then go and do that. If you want to add the real benefit of whether it's a sauna or a hot tub in terms of using it for heat adaptation is to go in right after your workout where you're already warm anyway. Your body is already warmed up, and the sauna or the hot tub is really maintaining that heat stimulus for longer to top up those benefits. It's much preferable to do that rather than, oh, I'm going to pre-warm myself by going in a sauna and then I'm going to go and exercise, because
Right, right.
it's much harder to heat yourself up passively, whereas it's a very normal thing for your body to raise its core temperature when it's exercising. So the heat adaptation studies that have used hot water immersion have shown that it is quite beneficial to have that potentially shorter bout of exercise or kind of heat-based exercise and supplement it with sauna or
Baths or
a
something.
hot tub afterwards. The other benefit of that kind of passive heat maintenance is at the end of a long ride, well, you can already have your recovery shakes or whatever there. You can already be starting that recovery nutritionally while you're still maintaining the heat load.
Excellent. And Normand, what do you think? If I could sponsor you a couple $1 million and you could redo this study with like everyone gets their own hot tub, would you do it?
Yeah, yeah, like just to kind of build on what Steven said is like you wouldn't even need to overdress in your garage. You could just do your Zwift session
Right? Yeah, because you
normally,
heat
right?
up pretty good,
You
like
heat
from
up
what I
pretty
could
good,
tell.
right? So
Yeah, yeah.
you do your Zwift race or like group ride for 40 minutes, and then you go and jump in your hot tub or sauna for another 20 minutes, and that's like an hour total, or give or
Okay.
take, right?
Do you think doing so what I've done in the past, and you can tell me this is I don't need to do this anymore, but I would do like say my interval set or whatever, and then I would do maybe 10 or 20 minutes overdressed with no fans to sort of warm down, cool down, and then I would go in the sauna or the bath for another say 20 minutes. What do you think of that? Do you think that's excessive or should I just go hop in the sauna and be done with it?
I probably do the latter, less work.
Less laundry.
Less, yeah. It's all about like because it's keeping it simple and like doable, right? Because if something's
Yes.
too logistically complicated and whatnot, people are not going to do it long
Exactly.
term enough to
Yeah.
get benefits.
Yeah, which is the beauty of your study for sure, is that like, it's nice to say, oh, well, they put a core sensor into someone and then they put them in Steven's fancy lab and they did all this stuff. But then it's like, well, as a coach or as an athlete, I don't know what I'm gonna take away from this. So that is really the beauty of this study that you've done is that you've done something that we all have garbage bags and we can turn our fans off.
Yep.
Excellent. Now we have maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Do you want to tease even this? You just hot off the presses, you've had this recent study that you did with actually women who were pregnant after pregnancy, and you had them do interval sprint interval training right after they were no, not right after they had their baby, but soon thereafter when they were ready. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Because it just seems like a really cool, hopeful study. I think, and another one that's in all women. So we may as
Yeah,
well
yeah,
highlight
totally.
this, and I can link to it.
Yeah, thanks for the plug. It got accepted. It's not published yet, so it
Oh,
should be
okay.
published soon. It got accepted. So yeah, this was another kind of like real world case scenario is that a lot of female professional athletes, they're continuing their professional career after giving birth, right? But then, which is super duper, but then there's no training advice, right? In my personal experiences, when my wife and I had our first child, we asked the doctor, we asked the midwife and the nurse and everyone like, what should we do for exercise to return to exercise after pregnancy? And no one really knew. It was all kind of like at 6 weeks to give you a check and then they say, have at it,
Yep. Yep.
which might be good or bad. So I figured, we could, if I want to know this, then definitely women want to know this. Um, so in essence, in this study, what we did is we recruited endurance athletes, mostly cyclists, um, and they started the study in the postpartum period, so after giving birth. And then we didn't use an arbitrary time point like 6 weeks. We said come in whenever you feel ready after giving birth within a certain time period. So on average, the entry time point was 8 weeks, but it ranged from 5 to 11. So some people started really early after giving birth, some people started a bit later. And then basically, my goal was to improve fitness. So my goal wasn't to do like yoga or like stroller walking. My goal was to
Right.
improve fitness. So we used,
And versus pre-pregnancy or just like from post-pregnancy? Like
yeah,
if you,
so absolutely. So no, we have a case study where we did pre-pregnancy, which is published. I could share with you. To improve fitness in the postpartum period.
okay.
So we used a very rigorous training intervention, which was sprint interval training. So 30-second sprints at 130% of the peak power achieved in a VO2 max test.
Whoa. Yeah, so full
So
full gas for 30
it was
seconds.
full gas,
Yeah.
like no holding back, as hard as you can for 30 seconds. And then the session started with 4 sprints and then progressed to 8 sprints over 6 weeks.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
we
so this is sort of
saw,
like Wingate studies.
yeah,
Sometimes they do
yeah,
something
yeah,
like this, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
similar
Okay.
principle. And then we saw a very good improvements in fitness, VO2 max, and peak power. which is very encouraging. We had really high adherence, so no one dropped out. Um,
Wow.
and the program was very well received. And then there was no adverse effects. It was well tolerated.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, so happy to talk more about that later.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. Really cool. So we'll link to that one for sure. In closing, then, I guess, did we miss anything as far as this like research in women and all this great work that both of you are up to?
Normand, do you want to start?
Research. I think we covered quite a bit. I think the take-home messages would be that, um, like males, females can adapt to heat, and then menstrual cycle shouldn't be a barrier for adapting to heat. It doesn't seem to have an effect. Um, if you're kind of chasing performance gains in the heat, the 2 weeks heat acclimation and heat maintenance seems to work quite well, and it can be done at home with minimal equipment. Um, by a general population, not just a population of healthy 21-year-old university students.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much for that work. And then, Stephen, is there anything you wanted to leave us with?
I think the big message from Normand's, which I just loved, his PhD studies, I think they were fill a really important niche and a really neglected area. And I think the big message is that females and women can heat adapt, as Normand says, that we don't necessarily have to overthink, oh, this is a really challenging population to study, and therefore, we might not prioritize it. I think Normand has demonstrated, and a lot of the literature is suggesting that we can study females. We should be obviously taking some measures and controls, but for the large part, we don't have to overthink, oh, we have to do X, Y, Z, and all of the other things too. So as scientists, I think it's a real good call to action that, hey, we can and should be doing more female research. And for women in general, I think this is also really good news. As Normand says, you can heat adapt. You can do it quite practically and comfortably. And then in terms of the postpartum study, it's that you can maintain and even improve and get back to fitness quite well postpartum, which again is great news. And it's all amazing research that Normand's doing. So I've been super proud to be associated with it.
Excellent. Well, and I'm super happy that you were both making time for us today to explain some of this research and share all this with us so that we can start take away and stay evidence-based.
Thanks for making an effort for that.
Cool.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.